Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Vanishing podcast, where we are talking process on the film that we are made that's coming out later this year. Today, we have the producer and owner of Front Lot Studios, Renee Vaunhefflyunn, which we practiced the last name before this, so we nailed it. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right into it. What made you want to be a producer specifically in the narrative space? I know that you had wrote, directed, and produced your own pilot. Had you had done stuff before that, or like what drew you into the storytelling side of production?
Sure. My journey to becoming a producer or wanting to step into the narrative space, as corny as it sounds, it's something that I've always wanted to do since I was like a kid or, in high school. And, we all thought about what we wanted to do when we got older and when we grew up. So I like, for example, when I was in high school, I was taking like video production classes and I just loved the idea of like creating an idea from the beginning stages all the way through to filming and editing through all stages of production. And I just absolutely loved it. And I carried that with me throughout college. I, went to Sacramento State and I got a degree in film. And even back then, I was just always, the wheels were always turning in my head. I was always thinking of like these like grand ideas of things I wanted to film. I wasn't sure how to execute them, but I feel as though I always kind of had that like creative producer brain, even way back when, before I, officially started my career. Funny enough, and I know everyone has their own very unique journey in the film and TV industry, myself included. I have a very unique journey where I didn't immediately step into producing. I've done everything from like working in news to being an editor to being a post production story producer in reality TV. So definitely not, a straight and narrow path towards producing. But I always felt that at the end of the day, like something was kind of gnawing at me, that I always felt like producing was something that I really always wanted to do. And I guess that's how life works. You always kind of go full circle, or you always go right back to the beginning. So I just felt like even though I work in the industry, I always felt like producing is something I've always wanted to pursue. So yeah, producing my TV pilot, You Had a Bad Day, was my first like debut, I guess, as a producer. And as soon as I worked on that project, I was like, yep, this is what I'm meant to do. And then just ran with it.
Was there a moment that, like, was it when you were on set during your pilot that you're like, oh, this is what, because I know you were also directing as well. Was it in like
Mhm.
the prep that you figured that out? Or like, when did you be like, okay, I think this is my lane and I want to move forward with this? Because you kind of have to, I definitely can relate to that. Like, you edit or you shoot or you kind of, I think it's good to have all those things, but you have to kind of explore first. And then you have a
Mhm.
moment of like, oh, I think I want to do this lane. Like, what was that on set for you? Or like, when did you be like, okay, this part of filmmaking I want to do?
Definitely. I don't think there was like one like light bulb moment where I was like, wow, this is what I meant to do. I think it's like it just kind of happens, like it ebbs and flows like through production, even like before we started filming, like during pre-production, maybe on set, maybe even after, like because being a producer, you're on for the long haul. Like you don't just show up on set and work the shoot and then your job's done. Like your job starts in the pre-production phase all the way through to post-production and marketing. And but I guess my moment where I was like, okay, this is what I meant to do, it was on set. But I do feel like it actually maybe is like later on, after you see all of your hard work pay off. Like if you have a premiere and you get to actually like see what you made like tangibly in front of you. I think for You Had a Bad Day, I believe when, we had our first premiere and, I just got to like look around and like see everyone's like reactions and everyone's faces and people laughing and crying. And we all just got to like celebrate like just what we just made. I think that was kind of like the goosebump moment of being like, okay, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And sometimes it's hard because when you're like in the thick of things, like you're in the thick of pre production, fundraising, or in the middle of like actually shooting, it's not like you're so focused on just getting the job done. It's hard to really like sit and process like what you're thinking and feeling. You're just kind of in flight or fight mode, just trying to like, get the shoot done and make sure everything goes smoothly. So I think later on, when I finally had a moment to process everything that happened and look back, that is when I was like, okay, yep, this is what I want to do. And I also think probably a lot of filmmakers feel this way, but I'm sure like a lot of filmmakers in the middle of like what they're doing probably question everything. Like, what am I doing? What did I sign myself up for? Even as much as you love what you do and as good as you are at your job, like, I know everyone feels that way, like, where you really are like, oh my gosh, like, I could just like walk away from this right now. And we've all had that moment. And so, it's hard to really be like, I love like what I do. But no, looking back, you absolutely are like, wow, like look what we created. And yeah, so I think it was actually a little bit delayed. It kind of came after, like when I finally had the moment to like process everything and see. And then I was like, yep, all right, I'm ready for the next project.
Yeah, it's definitely like during the project, sometimes you feel like you're stepping through mud or you're like climbing that
Hmm.
mountain and it's like, oh my God, like whether it's writing or the production or post or whatever, and it's such a long process that you have to like be in
Yeah.
that long haul for that you're like, you hit a lot of those points where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you get
Mm,
to see the final thing and you get to then see how other people react and you're like, totally worth it. And you just, all
yes.
that stuff goes away in the wind and you're like, cool, I could do that again. And then you sign up for like another year of pain or whatever to make another one.
Yes,
But
exactly. I have
that's why
heard
you gotta
it's
love it.
similar to I've heard this analogy from somebody where someone told me that filmmaking is almost like when somebody is like if you're pregnant and having a baby and it's just like, 9 months of just, you're just going through so much where you're probably like, I don't know if I wanna have kids after this, like, this and then, you have your kid and you're like, you forget everything after that, and that was like that yeah, that, is that kinda resonates with me, and I'm sure resonates with a lot of people where it's like, in the middle of it, you're like, "Oh, okay, this is really hard," like, but then after, yeah, it's like you just forget, all the hardships and remember why you're doing this and why we love it.
What makes you choose a project? Like, why did you choose The Vanishing, as well as what makes you say yes to a project in general? I know,
Sure.
like, you're a big proponent of filming in Sacramento and building the film community here. It's a small but mighty film community, but I think there's a lot of filmmakers taking big swings out here, which is really interesting. So, for
Mhm.
you, what made you say yes to this project, as well as just in general for filmmakers who are looking to approach a producer? What should they keep in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what made me say yes to The Vanishing was for a few reasons. First, it just kind of it's a gut feeling and an intuition feeling. Like when you're approached about a project or you're seeking a project, you definitely do want to go based on, as cheesy as it sounds, like kind of on feeling. And, but, even bigger than that, I also, I watched The Vanishing Part One and which I know a lot of people don't have that luxury to actually see like a tangible, finished product before they sign on to a project. So watching The Vanishing Part One, I already could immediately see your vision and what you wanted to do with The Vanishing Part Two. So that in itself was just an easy yes because I already saw what you were capable of. And now you wanting to take it a step further. So and then, of course, you and I met and, you explained your vision, like short term and long term. And I think that was really helpful that you were confident with what you wanted to do with The Vanishing. So I think as a producer, even though not everyone might have like their P's and Q's in order as much as, you did approaching The Vanishing Part Two. But I do think it's helpful when you do talk to somebody that does have that really like strong vision for their project. Because as a producer, even though there's so many things that need to happen and fall into place to make it possible, but I do think like the visionary behind the project, it's really helpful that you're like that you were so ambitious about The Vanishing Part Two and that you had a very clear idea of like what you wanted this project to look like. So I had no doubt that it was going to be a success, like from beginning to end. So, that was an easy yes. Another thing that was really, really important to me is that you wanted to film it in Sacramento. So, I'm a big advocate about supporting film in Sacramento as an independent filmmaker. I really like someone who I used to live and work in LA, and then moved back to Sacramento. I, really wanted to bring like that. that same energy that LA had towards filmmaking and bring it back to Sacramento. And, in opening Front Lot Studios, that was one of my main missions, was to actually produce projects in Sacramento, with Sacramento cast and crew. And like that was so important to me. So when you proposed The Vanishing, and it was such an ambitious project and something, that could have easily been filmed, in LA or wherever, but I like that you really chose to film it here and support the local Sacramento film community. I think was really great, and it's super super important. So that was another big thing that like I wanted, that was a yes for me, that I wanted to, commit to this project, because it's like I kind of need to put my money where my mouth is. If my production studio is all about supporting local filmmakers, but then I'm not actually following suit, then, that's not good either. So I definitely want to put my money where my mouth is and actually like support local Sacramento independent filmmakers. So that's what made, saying yes to The Vanishing so easy. And moving forward, again, like I don't believe in putting myself as a producer or Front Lot Studios into a box. I think in order to be a successful, company, I think it's okay to kind of like expand your horizons and do different genres, different projects, maybe things that like you've never done before, you might be a little bit uncomfortable with. Like I've never worked on a sci-fi fantasy before with like, visual effects and things like that. And I think it was, a healthy challenge for me as a producer, that only just, challenged me and made me better and a little more, well versed in the sci-fi world. But yeah, as far as like my next project, I mean, I think as far as like the actual project itself, I think I want to step into the feature film, world. I think that's feels like the most organic, natural next step for me. But yeah, I don't have like a specific like genre or medium of a project where I'm going to say like no to. I think I'm pretty open. I think it more just comes down to like the actual idea itself, and then the person who, comes to me with that idea, and kind of just seeing if this is something that like we can collaborate and work well together. And like you said, like earlier, where it's like, okay, this is a big commitment. Like, can you stand working with this person for, 1 to 2 years on this project? Is this something you're going to get sick of after a while? So you really have to think about that. But yeah, that was a loaded answer, but that's kind of like what I say yes to. And then, the projects I hope to say yes to in the future.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think what I'm hearing too is that you just have a set of values as a producer of like
Hmm.
filming in Sacramento, original ideas, people who come to you with a strong vision. It's like that seems to be like your filter for what you're looking for rather than somebody who doesn't know what they want, or yeah, like that just it seems like you have an operating principle of what you're looking for in that sense.
Yes, and just as much as I support anyone who wants to make a project, but I will say that I do want to help produce projects that will make an impact on people. And I'm stepping into this space, in my career, where I'm all for like making passion projects and doing that sort of thing, but I'm getting to that stage and level with my career where, I want people to take the Sacramento film industry seriously, and that, we are making films that are not just going to be shown locally, but could have so much potential to, be shown on a global scale, whether it's in the theaters, on a streaming platform. I just feel like Sacramento deserves its time to shine. And I want to support those projects that are taken seriously by, the public. And it's not just like a fun project. Like I actually want these projects to build up Sacramento, and be able to hopefully provide more work and jobs down the line.
Yeah, I agree. And especially, definitely with this film and where it's going and the feeling after being in production of just like, yeah, you want to make films that have like artistic integrity, but that get people
Yeah.
out of their homes to go see it. That's like the
Yes.
hope, right? Is like
Yes.
pushing so that this is something that people would actually pay to see. There is
Mhm.
something, we've all done our passion projects, we've gotten them out of the way. And there's a
Mhm.
certain point where it's like you make something and nobody watches it and you're like, okay, cool, that was for me. And you have to
Mhm.
have a realization of like, yeah, now there has to be an audience, or then you're just making
Yes.
stuff for yourself at a certain point. And if you want to do
No,
that, then do that.
and that's it. And I don't want to, I'm not saying that to discourage anyone from making their passion projects. Like I did that, you did that, we've all done that before.
Hmm.
I think just with as far as Front Lot Studios goes, like you said it perfectly. It's like I want to make projects that are for everyone, like not just like something that is, like you said, like for yourself, or it's good practice or a learning experience. I think I want, yeah, to step into that space where I want like these projects to be shown on a more national or global scale. So it is for everybody to see. But obviously it has to be at that, high production value, for that to be
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Well, let's move into the money and the reality of indie filmmaking. Speaking of, too, is
Sure.
what's the biggest myth people believe about indie filmmaking budgets?
I guess the myth is kind of the big, I don't know if it's a myth, but kind of the question mark as to like where the money comes from. I think everybody just wonders like how did you make such a great project on such like a low budget, or like, so I think that there's just a lot of like mystery behind fundraising as far as filmmaking goes. Like I think that, everyone should be very transparent about, yeah, like how did you make this project possible? And I think, a lot of people do talk about it also, especially in this day and age. I do think people are being more transparent about the filmmaking process. But I think like I just think that we are a lot more scrappy maybe than people may realize. I don't think, unless you were working on the project directly, I don't think like the general public understands like what goes on behind the scenes in order to make this project happen, money or no money. Like, if you have the money, great to like, have like a bigger budget production, that's amazing. But there's a lot of situations where for indie filmmaking, you don't have the budget. And that is when you start to get really creative and scrappy. But I think the positive and flip side to that is, pressure makes diamonds. And I do think that sometimes when you do have, restrictions, or, you have to operate within like a certain parameter or a certain budget, I do think it does push creativity. So I do think that that's like the flip side to it. But yeah, I do think that there's just a big, like, I don't know if people just think like the money comes out of thin air, like, where did you get the funding for your project? And there's so many different like avenues. But, one thing I have heard as far as like, finding the budget and money, because when I first started filmmaking, I always thought like the money came from, I don't know, this like magical like money fairy that just like funds films, and that's not really how it works. There isn't just some like random person that just like gives you $100,000 to film your movie. I mean, maybe in some people's cases that's true, but I think just finding any way to fund your film and your passion. Like it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be you're taking out a loan, you are, I don't know, you apply to a grant and you get your money that way. Like there is no like one way to like fund your film. I think that's the other thing is I think people just think like, yeah, they just like a studio just like grants them all this money to make their film. And I think the reality is that a lot of people, yeah, it's just like they do crowdfunding. So it's friends and family, it's grants, it's all kinds of different sources in order to make your film. And there's no like right or wrong way to do that.
And I think, too, the myth for me is just that you have to have a ton of money. Like,
Hmm.
we had a pretty solid budget for this one, but also it also felt low for like we pulled
Hmm.
off miracles too to make this film happen, especially in like a sci-fi fantasy thing. But I'm definitely a big believer in not letting money stop you from making a film, in a sense of
Yes.
like, oh, you need $100,000, but you can only get $20,000 back into that and make it happen. Like
Hmm.
you know,
Yes.
I there is a certain like it can become an excuse at some
Hmm.
point. I think, not talking about like everyone should have access to get in front of the right people to get this money, but I do think don't let it stop you. It shouldn't, because it does stop a
Yes.
lot. Well, if I had more money, then we could get this camera and we could do this and that. And it's like, does the audience really care about which camera you're using? At a certain point, yes, maybe, but like, especially
Hmm.
in indie filmmaking, while you're grinding and kind of figuring it out, you have to just make with whatever you can get, I feel like.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Don't be discouraged if you don't get the 100 grand you want for your project. And like you said, maybe it is only $20,000 that you have to make your project. But I think that, like you said, you should make it anyway. I think the idea and the writing and the script will speak for itself. And yeah, I think you should just make it regardless. And it will only strengthen you as a storyteller, as a producer, as a director. Because again, like I think it really does like push you to think outside of the box as a director. When you do have like the limited budget. So I do think that there is a positive to just pushing forward and creating your project regardless, and not letting it deter you, or lack of funds deter you from making your vision. Um,
Yeah. Where do you spend money on a production that surprises people, and where do you refuse to spend money? Especially in indie filming where every dollar counts.
yes.
I feel I have an answer to this, but I want to hear your answer too.
I think like doing your best to, pay for your team, like cast and crew. I think that is important, but one of the most important things in my opinion, even though I know that there are projects that people work on where everybody works pro bono and everyone's just passionate. But let's just say we do have some type of budget for our project. And I definitely think that paying your crew is very important, but something that maybe is like not an obvious thing that I think is important to spend money on, and is honestly, like, this is gonna you probably aren't expecting this answer, but I do think things like crafty and lunches is important because, I think keeping up the morale of the team is so important, especially on a low budget project. So let's just say, for example, everybody worked pro bono. Hey, as long as you have some great lunches and great crafty, like everyone has like such good energy and everyone's like excited. But I do think, creating like that, environment, even on a low budget, like I think you should always put money towards like crafty food lunches, just to show like your appreciation for, your crew. But something I wouldn't spend money on. Okay. Things I think that you can probably do, like, if there's any way you can, like, cut costs, like, on, for example, like, when I was printing out call sheets, I was like, "Could I go to, like, down the street and spend all this money at FedEx or at Kinko's, like, printing out, certain things, or could I just do it at home and do it for free?" And there's just, like, little things where you're like, "Well, I can just do it myself and, cut costs there." Or, like maybe like for example, like as far as like props go, I think props is like something that you could potentially get away with, like having a really low budget in props depending on the project. Like for example, for my TV pilot, You Had a Bad Day. I mean, we all came together. Like we had to create like a bedroom scene where, I mean, we all as a team came together, and I was like, well, I have this, prop. And then someone else said, well, I have this prop. And then someone else said, I have this. So we all kind of came together and like, I mean, we had a very, very low budget as far as props go. So I think like
Mhm.
that is something, again, depending on the project, but it depends. And at the same time, I don't know. It's hard because I also believe in not cutting corners either. Like, I don't think you really should shortchange certain things. I think if you can still deliver something high quality, without compromising budget, I think that is the way to go. But yeah, I mean, every project is completely different, and you kind of have to like prioritize like what is important to you as a producer or director. Like, do would your team prefer to be paid more, and then you don't, maybe your crafty budget is a little bit less, or maybe it's the opposite where you can't really pay your crew as much, but you're like, hey, I can like give you guys like a really great crafty table, and you guys will be really comfortable. I don't know, it just kind of, it depends on the project, but yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd second the food thing. I think that's
Mhm.
huge. You have to we've all been on a set that, like, doesn't have snacks, and you're like, "This is miserable." And
Mhm.
it is such a morale kill, so, especially in the indie filmmaking, like, feed people and feed them really well.
Yes.
For me, the other thing, it's not that you shouldn't spend money on it, but I'm a big believer in reach out to locations that you don't think you're gonna get, 'cause some
Mhm.
like, these big spaces of like a big forest area or like a winery or whatever, like
Mhm.
the assumption is, oh my God, they throw weddings here. They're going to cost so much money.
Mhm.
And I'm just a big believer, at least in my experience, is like you never know unless you ask. And they were like, yeah, we have nothing going on a Tuesday. Feel free to stop by for a couple hours. Great. So it's not that you don't spend money on it, but again, it's like that don't let money stop you before you
Yeah.
ask for something of like, hey, can we shoot here? And if you come into it with a passion, especially in like a community like Sacramento where there's not a lot of
Mhm.
filmmaking, people get really excited about it. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. How can we help? And so that's to me is like, don't let money stop you before you even kind of like approach a
Yeah.
location, at least I think.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right about like locations. It's like that could potentially be a huge part of your budget, but at the same time, like you said, I think sometimes people are more than happy to have you film at their location because they are just, movie buffs themselves and and maybe they don't really require any kind of payment because they just are getting free advertising through your project. So, like you said, yeah, kind of bouncing off that, I think, yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with like approaching it as like a hey, like we have a really low budget, but our compensation is we can help promote your business. And a lot of times people agree to that and they think that's a great idea. Worst case, maybe they do have like a fee, but if anything, now what it costs to potentially rent out a certain space, and you've begun to establish a relationship, with that company or location. And I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but I do also think that a big part of being a producer is literally just establishing relationships with people. So I think that that's, yeah, helpful.
What do you think filmmakers have to give up in a low budget scenario that, let's say, like a well funded studio film, what is kind of a limitation that you see with producing indie films as well as like filmmakers? Like, what do you think that kind of that box is?
I think with a lower budget film, I think that you just limit options. I think, like, for example, on a lower budget film, you might not have the budget to have like a huge sound stage where you have, like, for example, like for The Vanishing, we didn't have like our actors like on rigs like flying through the air and there's like big explosions and things like that. But let's just say we had like $1 million budget, maybe that's something, maybe that would kind of like, open up the world a little bit more. But I think just having like a big budget versus a smaller budget. Yeah, I mean, big budget, I mean, I feel like options are kind of endless. Like you can kind of do whatever you want. Like but I think with, indie filmmaking, which I think that, again, like you have your vision, but you kind of have to like condense it or make it like a little, like kind of make it just a little bit smaller. And I think, but then again, like I was saying before, I do think that that really shows your talent as a director is that you're taking this like big, grand, like big budget idea and you're making it on a small budget. But I do think that, like, at least as far as The Vanishing goes, I think it was executed like a big budget production. And I think that it is a talent in itself to be able to produce that. Like, look, I just made what looks like it could be $100,000 film and I made it on an 18K budget. So I do think that, of course, having more money, that definitely gives you a lot more freedom and room to play and be really like out of the box and creative and things like that. But I also think that, having a smaller budget, maybe that's a little limiting, but I think it also pushes you to like, again, think outside of the box and be creative. And yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it's that like pressure makes diamonds that you're talking about. It's like you have limitations, but that's kind of the point is like you only have so many choices. So you have to get, because I think the thing about, and Joey, our DP on the shoot, said this to me is like indie filmmaking is about being bold. You, this is the place you make bold choices because you have limitations. So yeah, I want to talk about the partnership between director and producer from your perspective. What does a director need from a producer, and how do you know when you're getting it right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the director producer relationship is super important. And going back to what I was saying earlier, where at least for me, I go based off of like feeling and intuition. Because you really do think about like, okay, we're about to like, step into these roles for a year or two and work together and collaborate together for a couple of years. And I think one, it's really important to make sure that, yes, it is a working relationship, but you also want to make sure that, you're going to be able to get along with this person for a couple of years. I think that that's super important because you don't want to be butting heads for 2 years. I mean, I don't think that I don't think that's necessarily like a good, working relationship. So I think kind of like just using the best of your ability just to kind of like foresee like, how your relationship will be with that person in the coming years. Is this someone I can see working with for 2 years on a project? Do we butt heads? Do we get along? Do we see eye to eye? Do we not see eye to eye? But I do think that what's worked for, you as the director and myself as the producer is I think that taking the ego out of the work relationship is very, very helpful. Because I know a lot of times, and I'm just guessing, but like I'm sure there's a lot of ego involved with filmmaking. And I think being like malleable and flexible and always willing to like, hear each other out, staying true to your vision, but also like being open to change and like, pivoting when you need to pivot or maybe you do have a value for the vanishing that you're holding on to and and I think it's good that you have values that you hold on to because that's what makes the vanishing. But I do think having like a healthy work relationship is really important as a producer, supporting you as a director. Again, I think it's important that I'm there to solve problems and not create problems. I just want to be like that support system for, any director that I work with. I want to be able to be the person that kind of like, even if like the shit is hitting the fan in the background, you don't need to know about it. Maybe after the project I'll tell you, but no, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. Um, but like if, things are happening behind the scenes, I will let you know when something is going on that's really important, but I have to have like a little discretion as far as like, do I really need to bother the director about this problem? Probably not because you're focused on the creative side. Creative and technical side of things. So I think having like discretion when it comes to being a producer and knowing when to approach your director with like questions or problems, like I think as a producer, you kind of have to be ready to take on a lot that happens behind the scenes and not bring it to your front door or bother you with it unless it's something that will eventually affect you in your project and the quality of your project. But yeah, I think just like, uh, yeah, not having ego, being open to suggestions and ideas. Like, I think we both understand that a good team is that we both bring something to the table. As much as like as filmmakers, we like to be know-it-alls and think we know everything, but I think that it's really important that like, if, I'm having trouble somewhere, you can offer your knowledge or vice versa, where you're like, hey, Renee, what do you think about this? And then I'll give my opinion. So I think, yeah, just like leaving your ego at the door and just being like open, vulnerable, flexible, like willing to pivot. I think that makes for a really successful, director producer work relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's being able to let the director keep his head in the clouds
Hmm.
at the same time keeping them super grounded of like, that's really
Yes.
cool if you had money for that. What else
Yeah.
can you do? You know what I mean? So it's like there's that balance of letting them dream, but also keeping them like super realistic.
Keeping their 2 feet on the ground. And it's
Yeah.
funny too because I feel like there were even moments where my head was also up in the clouds with you, and then you even to the director were like, "Actually, I think that we should just maybe keep it to this." I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." But I think as a producer, and maybe this is what makes me like a little bit different as a producer, is that I'm also like a dreamer too. And I also, have big aspirations. So I'm someone that will definitely give you a reality check, when things are unrealistic. But I am also the type of producer that I'm like, yeah, let's let's go for it, or at least shoot for the stars and see see what happens. But I know there's also way more like very realistic directors who will absolutely like, yeah, bring you out of the clouds and down to earth.
Yeah. Was there a creative decision on this project that scared you financially that turned out to be worth it?
I
It's a
think
very specific question.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like financially. I think I mean, we put a lot of budget into the cast and crew. And as I said before, like, I think that that to me is like a priority is paying your team to the best of your ability.
Mhm.
And looking back, I'm very glad that, again, it was low budget. I know we would have loved to, have had a higher budget as far as like, paying the team, but we, of course, did everything we could to, spread it evenly amongst everybody and, make everyone happy. And so I do think that, like, because I think a lot of times on projects, a lot of people, especially on indie projects, again, people work pro bono. They don't, they work for free. And it's really hard because sometimes you do want to just be like, hey, what? Like, you want people just to work for you for free. But I do think for our team, I just think that we had such a professional team. Like everyone who was on our project was,
Mm.
they've all been in the industry for a long time, and they all are very like highly vetted, people in the industry and in the Sacramento industry. And it's like, I really think that that was something that was a huge part of our budget. But looking back, I mean, there are no regrets, and it's like you feel happy that you're like, hey, I gave you what we could. And it's like I'm glad that we were able to, reciprocate, like what they did for our project. I mean, they brought just such a high quality production value to the project, which I think that's what's going to make The Vanishing Part 2 stand out above others, is that yes, it was a low budget project, but we put our investment towards the cast and crew, and I saw it pay off 100%. So I think, like, again, low budget project, but no one will ever know. Like, if, it's like it looks like a big budget production. So I think that, again, putting majority of our budget towards paying like our team, I think 100% has and will pay off.
Yeah. Shout out to the amazing A
Shout
team.
out to you guys.
Bigger picture stuff for you. Why do indie films matter right now?
I talk about this all the time.
It's a big question.
As someone who is a consumer of media, film, television, again, my normal day job is a story producer in reality TV, so I'm very privy to the TV world and, content that we are producing for everyone. So in addition to me like working in, television, but also being a huge consumer of someone who, watches this content also, I'm just a huge advocate for indie filmmaking because some of my favorite projects that I have seen have been from independent, filmmakers, production companies. I feel like indie films definitely have that like je ne sais quoi that maybe like big budget productions have, like big studio productions. And I'm not like, there are definitely big studio productions that I know are just, huge blockbuster hits and like, resonates with the world for like years to come. And I definitely have some, favorite movies that are also just from like, a big huge studio. And so I'm not trying to like, take away from, projects that have been made with a studio backing. But I do think that indie filmmaking is so important because it goes back to, again, what I want to advocate for Front Lot Studios, which is creating original IP. I think the public is craving original IP and stories and things that are either like with The Vanishing, like an escape from reality, or it's something that is relatable. And I think that, like, so for example, I think with like You Had a Bad Day, I made that project because again, it's about, a girl who has ADHD and is trying to break into the film industry. And it's like super raw, super vulnerable. And I hope, if it is created into a series one day, that it's one of those shows that people just like are like laughing or in tears because it's so real and it's so relatable. Or with The Vanishing, it's a sci-fi fantasy, and it almost even when we were on set, like you kind of forget where you are. And I actually felt like even being on set watching it, you kind of lose yourself in the world that you created of The Vanishing. And it was like this, it's like this new magical world. And it was like, I think that when all is said and done, and I think it's going to be a project that just takes you out of reality and is an escape from everything. And I think we also need that too, but we don't need like another recycled project that we've seen before. And it's like just because it cost $5 million to make or $20 million to make does not mean that it's good or that's what the public wanted. And I think like again, like I have my foot in both ponds. Like I actually work in TV, but then I'm also a consumer in it. And I also, am starting to carve my way in the indie filmmaking world. And so I think that, I would like to say that think I have a well rounded point of view of like what the people want. And we want original content that is relatable. And I also think and if anyone sees this, I'm not sure how many people this will reach, but I do think that we should not give one franchise like $50 million. I'm just throwing a number out there. I don't know how much money. Let's, instead of giving one franchise that's been recycled over and over $50 million, and let's like spread the wealth and the generosity amongst all the filmmakers who are, busting their butts to make, their dreams come true. But, they have, imagine like they did something amazing on their low budget, but imagine if you gave them, a little bit more money and room to play with, like how amazing these projects would be. So I do think that's why I'm just such a huge advocate for indie filmmaking and why I made Front Lot Studios, because yeah, I'm just one person, but I mean, I'll keep advocating for indie filmmakers until the wheels fall off and there's something changes, because we're very creative. And I think indie filmmakers deserve a chance to also like be able to play with the big leagues and be at that level.
Amen to that.
Amen.
What is this project specifically? What does The Vanishing mean to you beyond just the credits at the end of the film?
I think what is really important with The Vanishing beyond the credits is I'm really grateful for everyone on the team and getting to know everybody. And again, even though I'm from Sacramento, I lived in LA for a little while. And moving back to Sacramento, I ironically enough didn't have much of a connection to the Sacramento film community. So I essentially kind of was starting from ground zero again. And so I think what was so important was the opportunity to collaborate and work with such an amazing team. I mean, I'm sure you can agree that everybody on set, I mean, that was like the most fun 5 days of shooting. Like we probably all forgot like that we were, out in the elements for like, 12 or not 12 hours, but, we were out there for very long days. But just the camaraderie amongst everyone, it was just such a positive experience. So I think for me, it's not so much the credit. I think for me, I appreciate building those relationships with, other local filmmakers. I think that is what is the most important, because we aren't in the film business to just make one film and be done and retire after that. Like we're in the film business because we want to keep creating and keep creating more content and making more content. So I think like, yeah, just working together like as a team to create this idea, I think it's just such a cool thing to witness and experience, especially being the producer too, because I can, even though I'm doing a million things like behind the scenes and on the side, I also have those moments where I can step back and kind of watch everything as a whole, because you as a director, you're like in it, you're talking to the actors, you're talking about, what's to come next. But I had those moments where I could like take a step back and look at it big picture. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And this is like a very unique experience that a lot of people don't get to experience, is that type of like artistic collaboration. So yeah, I think just the takeaway, and to me, what's more important than like a producer credit is the relationships that you walk away from, once the shoot is over.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those projects where I walked away being like, everybody was just in it. Like,
Mhm.
that was something that I had hoped for going into it, was just, like, focus and presence from everybody, and I remember even asking for everyone to
Mhm.
be present, and it was just, like, everybody was so, especially in a fantasy film where
Mhm.
there's so much, like, "Wait, how does this work? Like, what is supposed to happen here? I don't really know." Like,
Sure.
everyone was just locked in on making the best thing that they could, and that is, like, indie filmmaking at its best, where everyone,
Yes.
it's like, yeah, like one day we got beaten up by mosquitoes, another day we got beaten up by rain, and another day we got beat up by wind, and it was just taking a beating from the weather, but it's like you couldn't tell. Everyone was just doing what we had to do and
Yes.
made an amazing film at the end of it.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and, yeah, no, it was just a pleasure, like, working with everybody and appreciate everyone just being so professional and bringing their A game every single day, rain or shine, and it was raining in the
Yeah.
beginning, and I'm sure we were all a little bit miserable, but, I mean, you would never know. Like, everyone just, everyone was so positive and hardworking, and I think that shows, and, yeah.
If you could go back to day one of pre-production, knowing what you know now, what's
Yes.
something you would change?
I would say you can never be too prepared.
Hmm.
I would say I relied a little bit too much on, "Oh, I'll have time for that." Like, when I get home, I can, like, print out the call sheets, or I can, because I also was first AD on The Vanishing Part 2, but, don't don't underestimate time because, especially when you were, like, actually filming, it will go by in the blink of an eye, and usually when you come home from the shoot, even if it was, like, a shorter day, you're probably exhausted, and the first thing you want to do is just rest and relax. And I would say that, like, looking back, I should have prepared a little bit more, in the sense that, like, these little things that I was like, oh, that won't take that much time, and next thing I know, I'm like trying to print call sheets out, or I'm trying to do all these like little things, or like adjust the call sheet to send out, again, things that I totally underestimated, like, oh, how long it actually will take. So sorry to everyone who got a call sheet at like 10 o'clock at night, because myself and second AD Jenna, we were like working back and forth and, on it to make little tweaks and changes and just things like that. Things that are small, I think that, again, just prepare as much as you can before the shoot, because you really like want to have all of your ducks in a row before you start day one, because things will go wrong. You will have to pivot accordingly. And you want to have like the time and bandwidth to deal with that versus like updating a call sheet or doing little things that, like, maybe isn't, that time consuming. But when you're exhausted, tired, you have an early call shoot and you don't want to, wake up at, the break of dawn to be doing these things when you should be focusing about X, Y, and Z. And oh, also I think like prepare, again, this kind of goes with like just being prepared ahead of time. I think as far as like lunch goes, definitely should prepare again a little bit sooner, because just even just things like lunch is so important, and like I think being prepared ahead of time is just super important. So it's a lot of like things like that that like you don't even think about behind the scenes. Like, maybe people think as like a producer you're just like sitting back in your chair, like, scrolling on your phone and things like that, but that's not the case. Like, the producer is like thinking about every little thing, that is going right, but also what could potentially go wrong on set. So I think just to help yourself, like, prepare as much as you can. You can only do so much because things do just happen, like, out of the blue, and you can't prepare for it. But yeah, I think that is one thing that I'm like moving forward, like onto my next project. I think definitely like just being as prepared as possible, because things will go wrong and you will need to be Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I ever saw you sit for the 5 days of shooting. You were
Not
just
possible.
moving. Yeah, and it's a good point even just for anybody. It's like the preparing for, "Hey, on this 4th day, we're gonna be outside and it's supposed to be super honey or sunny, so I'm just make sure to put sunscreen in my backpack." Just like, because when, yeah, you're so exhausted that you just need to get out the door in the morning,
Yeah.
having your
Yeah.
backpack like prepped and you grab
Mhm.
it and you go. So you just, it's like the less decisions you have to make during the shoot,
Yes.
the better. Cause is all consuming. You're like in a vortex of production where like
Mhm.
you don't even hear the outside world. And then you get home and you're like face down on the,
Yes,
at least I
exactly,
was
exactly.
just totally out straight to bed every day.
Yeah. And people even I'm someone who's like, "I'm not gonna be that tired." Like, you really sometimes because you have, like, that adrenaline going, and then after you don't realize how exhausted you are after a shoot day, and then, even multiple shoot days, you're just like yeah, you don't wanna do any kind of, you don't wanna open your laptop, you don't wanna do any kind of, clerical work, it's like you just wanna be focused on the project itself, so I think, yeah, anything, um and I'm sure that goes for any department, is being just as prepared ahead of time as you possibly can be, so when the time comes and you're on set, then everything goes smoothly.
Yeah. Okay. Final two questions for you. Finish the sentence. The only reason
Mhm.
indie films get made is
The only reason indie films get made is because we are relentless, period. We are relentless in the name of filmmaking, and I will say that being an indie filmmaker, you have to be relentless because it is not for the faint-hearted, but I think that a lot of independent filmmakers, I mean, giving up is not in their repertoire or in their middle name. Like it's yeah, you have to like you said, regardless of budget, money, no money, like they're gonna make it happen no matter what.
beautiful answer. Well said. I could have not said it any better. What's the one thing you knew about producing or even owning a production company that you wish you knew when you started? Like if someone's coming into indie filmmaking, like, oh, I want to produce indie films, what would you tell them?
It is more work behind the scenes than you could ever imagine. I even looking back, like before I officially became a producer, I had no clue like what it would entail. I'm not sure like what assumptions are made about producers, and what we do behind the scenes. But it is not like glamorous at all. It requires a lot of sitting behind a desk and, making phone calls and sending out emails. It's a lot of behind the scenes work in order to prepare for a film shoot. It's almost like you're like managing a whole team and it's like all these pieces that are like floating around and you're like trying to like corral everything together and like make something whole and it's just like it's kind of I don't wanna say chaos, but it's, like, so much that's, like, happening behind the scenes and a lot of, like, multitasking and, doing, like, multiple things at once. It's not just, like, one linear job or role or duty, like, the job of producing is, like, 10 different things happening all at one time, and there's no guidebook on how to be a producer. You kind of just figure it out as you go along. But I think that I had a rude awakening, especially on You Had a Bad Day, of how much work goes on behind the scenes in order to make that happen. So, yeah, but even then, I still love it. I mean, I'm like, this is what I meant to do. I have ADHD and I'm like, all right, if there was a dream job, it's being a producer because multitasking is what I'm good at and juggling a bunch of things at one time. So I'm like, okay, there is a job that's, created for me. But yeah, there are a lot of like late nights and early mornings and just, and where it can be, it's very much like a solo job until you are on set. Like it's not, so I think like a lot of people might think of like producing as like the super glamorous job where you're like hobnobbing with all these people and like going to all these events and things like that. And maybe that comes later. But yeah, no, it really is just like boots on the ground, like, sitting behind a computer for hours, like coordinating things and just making things happen. And I think if anyone like wants to get into producing, you have to be willing to like in order to get all the cool exciting stuff later on, like this comes first, like the actual work part of it. And that part is not what a lot of people might think it is. And even I didn't realize how much work producing was, like how much prep work before a shoot. And again, like even though I think everything on set for The Vanishing, went dare I say, like, perfectly, like, almost perfect, like, things were, like, very, like everything was very streamlined and went really well, but, like, there were things, me personally, that, I'm like, if I just prepared for that, this could have gone smoother," or, like, "This could have been better." So, but hindsight's 2020. You don't know what you don't know until it's, too late, and then but it's just a learning experience moving forward, but, yeah, just again, tying it back to being relentless, like, you just have to just keep going, keep pushing, keep walking through the mud, like, it might feel like a lot and like you're wearing a lot of hats, but yeah, it always pays off in the end, so
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time. I'm super grateful that we were able to collaborate on this project together.
yeah.
I'm so excited with how this turned out. We still have a feels like a mountain of work left to do,
Mhm.
but I'm yeah. And thank you for taking the time to do this podcast today here too. I appreciate it, and I think it's a lot of really valuable things for people who want to be a producer or even just curious of how a production gets made and what a producer does. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always like more than happy to answer questions for anyone who's interested because even though I'm in the industry, I am like a little bit newer to producing. And I think sometimes that could be helpful because I'm in the middle of, going through this process. So I think sometimes, it is helpful to have someone who's like maybe just a couple of steps ahead of you. It's good to get like my perspective. I'm always happy to be like, "Hey, I just experienced this. Don't do this." Like, this is what I learned literally, like, just recently. So I'm like very much someone who's like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm not afraid to like talk about like my experiences that I go through, good or bad, because if it, helps someone avoid a certain situation or they could maybe just do something differently, it's like, why wouldn't I want to help someone? And so, yeah, I'm excited for, what's next.
You've heard it here first. Reach out, people.
Yes. Don't be afraid to reach out. And myself or Adam or anyone, any other
Mhm.
filmmakers, I think, don't be afraid to, yeah, just ask for advice because we all started from somewhere. So, even if someone else is like further along, I'm sure most times they are more than happy to tell you their story or, what they learned, becoming a filmmaker.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for doing this.
Yeah.